Hello, my name is Sean. I'm a big brother with Achieve Miami. Today I'll be reading Thank You, Amelia Bedelia by Peggy Parish. This book has an level of 2.6. I love this book because it shows how words can have different meanings based on the context in which they're used. Always remember to ask an explanation if you don't understand something that's being explained to you or requested of you. Just ask. Get some more information before you commit to doing what you're being asked to do. Now, I'll hope you like this book as much as I do. And if you're ready, let's get started. Mrs. Rogers was all in a dither. Great Aunt Myra is coming today. Now, that is nice, said Amelia Bedelia. I do love company. And here's a picture of Mrs. Rogers frantically concerned that Great Aunt Myra is coming. But Amelia Bedelia, petting the dog, she doesn't seem worried. In fact, she's happy that company is coming to the house. Mrs. Rogers explains, "We've been trying for years to get her to visit," said Mrs. Rogers. "But Great Aunt Myra says the only place she feels at home is at home. So everything must be exactly right. We do want her to be happy here." "Now don't you worry your head," said Amelia Bedelia. "I'll fix everything. What should I do first?" And here is Amelia Bedelia calming Mrs. Rogers and assuring her that she'll handle everything, and she's ready to accept whatever request or instructions Mrs. Rogers gives her. "Well, the guest room must be ready. Strip the sheets off the bed. Remake it with the new rosebud sheets," said Mrs. Rogers. "Thank goodness you're here." Amelia Bedelia went to the guest room. "These folks do have odd ways. Imagine stripping sheets after you use them." So there's Mrs. Rogers giving Amelia Bedelia those rosebud sheets, and Amelia going into the guest room to strip the bed sheets. She found it odd. Why would you strip bed sheets after you use them? But Amelia didn't ask the question, and she was just simply following the instructions based on the wording used by Mrs. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia shook her head, but she stripped those sheets nonetheless. And there she is, stripping the sheets from the bed. Amelia Bedelia had just finished stripping the sheets when the doorbell rang. "That must be the laundryman," said Mrs. Rogers. "That must be the laundryman with Mr. Rogers' shirts," called Mrs. Rogers. "Please check them and make sure they're all there." Amelia Bedelia hurried to the door and took the package. There she is, getting the packages from the laundryman with Mr. Rogers' shirts. Amelia Bedelia opened the package. She unfolded each shirt. 2 sleeves, 1 collar, 1 pocket, and 6 buttons. Yes, they're all here. There's Amelia Bedelia checking those shirts, examining them, making sure that all the shirts are there with the collars, their buttons, and sleeves. "There's not a thing missing," said Amelia Bedelia. "Now to check them." "It would be a sight easier to buy them already checked," said Amelia Bedelia, but she quickly checked each shirt. Here she is, checking the shirts. If you notice, she's got a can of paint, a paintbrush, and she's painting on the shirts. Mrs. Rogers came downstairs in a rush. "Amelia Bedelia, My bright pink dress has spots in it. Please remove them with this spot remover. Leave the dress out. I'll wear it tonight. Now I must go to the market. Mrs. Rogers is providing or giving Amelia Bedelia the jar to remove the spots from her bright pink dress. Amelia Bedelia looked at the bright pink dress. I don't see any spots. This dress just needs a washing. Then another dress caught Amelia Bedelia's eye. So she's looking at the light pink dress, and she sees that there aren't real spots. It just may need some cleaning, but there are no spots. But she noted another dress that did have some spots. She must have meant her light pink dress. Now that one sure is spotted. Amelia Bedelia held the dress up. It looks mighty nice with the spots in it, but I guess she's tired of it that way. And there she is. It's a pretty spotted dress. But listening to the instructions of Mrs. Rogers, Amelia Bedelia is going to remove those spots. Amelia Bedelia put spot remover on each spot. Then she waited. Nothing happened. Didn't think that stuff would work, said Amelia Bedelia. She got the scissors, and Amelia Bedelia removed every spot from that dress. There she is, trying it with the spot remover. Not too successful. Here's the sure way to remove the spots from the dress. Amelia Bedelia, called Mrs. Rogers. Please take these groceries. Amelia Bedelia ran to take the bag. Here are some roses, too. Do scatter them around the living room. I must get my hair done now. While I'm gone, wash all the vegetables and string the beans. If you have time, make a jelly roll. Great Aunt Mara loves jelly roll, said Mrs. Rogers. There's Mrs. Rogers giving Amelia Bedelia the vegetables and the roses. And Amelia Bedelia, listening to those instructions, is going to scatter the roses and wash and string the vegetables. Amelia Bedelia stopped in the living room. Seems like roses will look nicer sitting proper-like in vases. But if she wants them scattered, scattered they will be. And there she is, scattering those roses all over the room. Amelia Bedelia went on to the kitchen with the groceries. She washed all the vegetables. Then she found a ball of string, and Amelia Bedelia strung those beans. There's Amelia Bedelia washing those vegetables as she's instructed, and stringing those beans with that ball of string as she was instructed by Mrs. Rogers. Jelly roll, exclaimed Amelia Bedelia. I never heard tell of jelly rolling. But Amelia Bedelia got out a jar of jelly. Amelia Bedelia tried again and again, but she just could not get the jelly to roll. Look at her, trying to get the jelly to roll. She's never heard of it before. But because Mrs. Rogers requested it, and because Amelia Bedelia is trying to assist Mrs. Rogers for Great Aunt Myra's visit, she's trying to roll jelly. Amelia Bedelia washed her hands. She got out a mixing bowl. Amelia Bedelia began to mix a little of this, a pinch of that. Great Aunt Myra, or no Great Aunt Myra, there's not going to be any rolling jelly in this house tonight, said Amelia Bedelia. She's putting a little something together, a little flour. See some apples. She's making something in that bowl. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers arrived home at the same time. Mrs. Rogers called, "Amelia Bedelia, please separate 3 eggs and pare the other vegetables you washed. I'll do the cooking." Then she and Mr. Rogers hurried upstairs to dress. There's Mr. and Mrs. Rogers coming home from a full day, and Mrs. Rogers is explaining to Amelia Bedelia, "Please separate 3 eggs and pare those remaining vegetables." Amelia Bedelia took out 3 eggs. "I wonder why they need to be separated. They've been together all day and nothing happened." But Amelia Bedelia separated those eggs. "Pare the vegetables?" Amelia Bedelia laughed. "Here, you 2 go together, and you 2. Now be careful, or I'll be separating you 2. Here's a picture of Amelia Bedelia separating those eggs. There's one here. There's one here. And then the vegetables that she's paring, she's putting them in 2s. Amelia Bedelia went up to Mrs. Rogers' room. "What should I do with these stripped sheets?" she asked. "Stripped sheets?" exclaimed Mrs. Rogers. But she got no further. Mrs. Rogers is a little confused. Stripped sheets? Amelia Bedelia was simply doing what Mrs. Rogers told her to do. Mr. Rogers roared, "What in thunderation happened to my shirts?" "Oh, don't you like big checks? I didn't have time to do little ones, but I will next time," promised Amelia Bedelia. There's Mr. Rogers with his newly checked shirt. Amelia Bedelia was concerned that he didn't like the big checks, but she promised to do smaller checks the next time. "My dress!" exclaimed Mrs. Rogers. "It's full of holes." "Yes, ma'am. I removed every single spot," said Amelia Bedelia. There's the dress, missing those holes, or missing those spots with the holes. Before Mrs. Rogers could say any more, the doorbell rang. "Great Aunt Myra," said Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. They rushed to the front door. So they are running down to get to the front door. "Good evening, grandniece. Good evening, grandnephew. My, that trip made me hungry," said Great Aunt Myra. "I'll cook dinner right now," said Mrs. Rogers. Everybody went into the kitchen. There's Great Aunt Myra coming home, or coming to the house from a long trip. She seems very hungry. And Mrs. Rogers promises to make dinner right away. "Amelia Bedelia, did you string the beans?" asked Mrs. Rogers. "Yes. See, they do give such a homey look," said Amelia Bedelia. There she is with her strung beans. "Where are the eggs I asked you to separate?" said Mrs. Rogers. "Here's one. One is behind the clock, and the other one is over there. Did I separate them far enough apart?" asked Amelia Bedelia. Mrs. Rogers said nothing, so Amelia Bedelia went on. Amelia Bedelia is showing how she separated the eggs, just as Mrs. Rogers asked. "And I paired the vegetables. They went together real well, and there weren't any left over." Here's Amelia Bedelia showing the paired vegetables in groups of 2s. Miss Rogers slapped her hand on the table. It hit right in a sticky blob. "Ugh! What is that?" she shouted. "Jelly," I tried to make it roll, but it just plipped-plopped all over the place, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, exclaimed Mrs. Rogers. How do you get things so mixed up? Things mixed up? Oh, I plumb forgot, said Amelia Bedelia. She hurried to the stove. This is Mrs. Rogers with the jelly all over her hands, wondering how did Amelia Bedelia get things so mixed up? And then that reminded Amelia Bedelia that she had something in the stove. Amelia Bedelia opened the oven door. Great Aunt Myra sat up straight and sniffed. Hot apple pie, I do declare. Now that's the kind of mix-up thing I like. Amelia Bedelia got that apple pie out of that stove, and Great Aunt Myra smelled it and loved it immediately. Great Aunt Myra announced, Grandniece, grandnephew, I like it here. Oh, Great Aunt Myra, we're so glad, said Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. They both began to talk at once, but Great Aunt Myra wasn't much for words. She had her eyes on that last piece of pie. They're all enjoying the pie, but Great Aunt Myra can't think of anything else other than that last piece. Great Aunt Myra put the last piece of pie on her plate. Then she said, Grandniece, grandnephew, I will visit you more often. That Amelia Bedelia really knows how to make a body feel at home. Thank you, Amelia Bedelia. Everyone seems happy, despite the mix-up. Amelia Bedelia smiled. She and Great Aunt Myra would get along. That's the two of them. Great Aunt Myra enjoying her apple pie. That is the end of Thank You, Amelia Bedelia. Again, one of my favorite books. Thank you so much for reading with me today. I hope you liked Thank You, Amelia Bedelia as much as I do. I can't wait to see you again at the next Achieve Saturday. Take care.